Levi. Excuse Levi for his 3 minutes absence. Do we need to take a vote on that? Okay. It's been excused. Now we need to do roll call. So since Margaret's not here, I'll go ahead and start that. Levi Kearns.
Here.
Michelle McLeod here. Jeannie Wallace.
Here.
We've got 2 open member spots. I think that that's a typo because, and your name is Lauren.
Lori,
Okay, Lori,
i.e.
i.e.
Lynn.
Okay. So everyone's present and Dawn isn't on this agenda yet, but I'm going to go ahead and excuse his absence if he doesn't make it onto the Zoom meeting part of it. Okay. I'd like to start with number 2, nominations for election of chair. I'm not disgruntled and I'm honored to be the chair. And I love Benton City and all their employees from the mayor on down. And I might be the first one who ever sat here and said that, resigning a position, because I came here in 1976 and I love Benton City and I'm sure I'll be involved elsewhere. But for tonight, I want to do nominations for the chair position. And I'd like to start by nominating Ms. Wallace for chair.
I second that.
Okay, the ayes have it. Okay, well, all we need is a second.
Okay.
And so I guess now we need a nomination for a second in case Ms. Wallace cannot attend the meeting for any reason. So we'll go ahead and let the body make the nominations. Yes.
I nominate. Oh, would you do that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how long I'm going to be doing this because really I have more years behind me than I have ahead of me. And I think really a younger person might be a better choice at this time.
I just started an electrical business and I have a real estate business and I'm very busy.
Okay, for the time being, okay, yeah, yeah, I
You're
work
busy.
with kids, so I understand that and I have my own. So at this time, I will accept that position.
Can we have a formal nomination and go through the process to where everybody out
Yes.
there sees that we're doing this?
Yes, okay.
I nominate Michelle McLeod for the vice chair.
I second.
And at this time, I will accept it. Well, I'm planning to retire. I've been here for many years. And I've been volunteering for 33 years. And I want to go out and live my life. Not that I'm not concerned with all of your lives. So at this time, I will accept. So we can go ahead and swap
Right now.
if you want.
Okay.
Okay, or we could have approval of the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes as written.
I second.
Do we need a vote on that? Okay,
Yes, Commissioner Lynn.
Michelle McLeod, yes.
Burns eye.
Yes. Wallace, yes.
Okay, the approval of the minutes have passed. At this time, we'll start the public hearing on the code amendment, BCMC, proposed adoption of the Benton City Multiple Code, Chapter 2062, Residential Design Standards. we've got a staff report. Does anyone want to discuss it?
Yes, I will
Thank
do that.
you. Thank you, Millie Ann.
Yes, this is Millie Ann Van Devender with AHBL. We work as contract planners for the city of Benton City. JB, do you have that PowerPoint ready? Go to share screen. The green part, yep, right there. And then pick the PowerPoint. That one. Then you double click on it. There you go. And then remember the little monitor guy on the upper left? That one. You click that. There we go. Okay. So as Commissioner McLeod said, this is a public hearing, a legislative public hearing for the proposed adoption of Benton City Municipal Code, Chapter 20.62 Residential Design Standards. JB, can you, next slide, please? Yep. So this is a legislative public hearing, so we didn't ask you to disclose whether you had any ex parte communication like we would for a quasi judicial public hearing. Legislative public hearings are for code changes like this or for your comp plan. It's more for policy. So it's okay if you've been talking to the community, people in the community about this. And the purpose of holding a legislative public hearing is to gather information from the community and to make your decision based on that. For policy changes like this, we have to take it through the Washington Department of Commerce. So a notice went to the Department of Commerce on May 4th. And this is just to tell you that all of the steps have been, all of the boxes have been checked for the process for this code amendment. A SEPA DNS was issued. All of the public notices were issued correctly. And then we even sent a courtesy notice to the development company, to some contacts. And then if you remember, there was a planning commission workshop that I came and presented the information to you on June 23rd to give you a little tutorial. And what we gathered from that workshop was that you wanted 3 changes made to the draft. You wanted to include requirements for windows on corner lots. You wanted to get rid of the language that required attached garages. And you wanted to include requirements to prevent garages from dominating the primary facade of residential structures. So we took those suggestions and incorporated them into the draft code amendments. Next slide, please. So just to give you a quick reminder, and for anybody that happens to be watching that wasn't at the workshop, there were several reasons why residential design standards are desirable. AHBL was asked to come up with the draft design standards when the moratorium was put in place by City Council. And so it's important to get the design standards accomplished. So to make some progress on the design standards before the moratorium is up in November, I believe. Otherwise, the city would want to consider extending the moratorium. So there are many comprehensive plan sections that support having design guidelines, create a well-designed and aesthetically pleasing city that reflects the small town character, enhance the positive image of the city, flexible design standards, etc. So that's all in your adopted comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. So the proposed standards will apply to all newly constructed or newly placed dwellings in the R1, R2, and R3 districts. R1 is in your code, but is not currently. There's no land with that designation right now. And the 1, 2, and 3 designate the density for those districts. So most single family homes are in R2, and then multifamily homes are allowed in R3. The standards wouldn't apply to multifamily dwellings with 5 or more units. In other words, apartments. And they also do not apply to the R3M zone. And R3M is intended mostly for recreational vehicles and mobile home developments. So that's why it wouldn't apply there. And these standards won't apply to accessory or pertinent structures or to accessory dwelling units. Next slide, please. So this is where it should start getting familiar. In the workshop, I showed you a bunch of different slides to show what the different rules mean. So the first one is a requirement for a minimum of 32 square feet of glazing on the portion of the dwelling facing the street. And the minimum required glazing could occur on multiple floors. And so the idea with that is the classic eyes on the street. So to be able to see out to the front street from inside the home, to be able to engage with the neighborhood, to see what's going on out there, to see who's driving by or walking by or riding their bicycle by. And then the caveat is that dwellings with less than 32 square feet of glazing on the facade that contains the primary entrance must contain covered porches with a minimum of a 4-foot overhang. So if there is a reason to not have at least 32 square feet of glazing, then there's this allowance that you could just have a bigger porch area. So again, it allows for that engagement for the citizen in the home to be able to, perhaps go out and sit or stand covered and see what's going on in the neighborhood. So here are examples. The picture on the left is of a house with less than 32 square feet of glazing and less than a 4-foot overhang. The one in the middle, that home has greater than or equal to 32 square feet of glazing. And then the one on the right has more than 32 square feet. And just to point out that the first floor likely has enough glazing on its own. You can see there are also windows in the door and next to the door on the one on the right. So there are different ways to accomplish this. Next slide, please. So we talked about at the workshop whether or not it would be important to have this requirement on all sides of a house that face the street or all sides of a building. And you wanted to go forward with that requirement. So we incorporated what's in the blue is the new language there. So when a dwelling faces 2 or more streets, there needs to be 32 square feet of glazing on the facade that contains the primary entrance, like the previous rule. And there needs to be a minimum of 16 square feet of glazing on any other street facing facade. So if you're on a through lot or a corner lot or some kind of funky lot that has more than one facade facing a street, then it's the same idea applies. It's just that there's an emphasis on the front facade, which would typically be the one with the front door. The caveat for being allowed to have an overhang of 4 feet or greater still applies for that primary facade. And it encourages and accentuates and allows that, again, that eyes on the street concept, that way for the homeowner or the renter or whoever's living in the unit to be able to look out and engage with the neighborhood and see what's going on. Next slide, please. Another requirement of this new code section is that all entry porches or landing areas have to be constructed as an integral part of the dwelling architecture. And this promotes permanence in a neighborhood versus a temporary structure that can just drive away from a little deck. So you can see the building on the right has a nice little porch that has the same roof line and just in miniature, and the stairs and the colors and everything ties in with the house. It's integrated. It's an integral part of the dwelling architecture. And that's not to say that the building on the right is the exact aesthetic. That's not what we're requiring. It's just that there be some kind of connection there. Next slide, please. Another requirement is that eave overhangs are required and have to be a minimum of 12 inches. So you'll see on the left, there's not really an eave to speak of on that house. And then on the right, there are greater than 12-inch eaves. Next slide, please. A further requirement is the main roof of all dwellings has to have a minimum of a 512 pitch. And existing roofs on buildings that were legally established and permitted that have less than a 512 pitch could be rebuilt, altered, enlarged, or remodeled without having to change it to a 512 pitch. And again, you can see examples. The image on the left has less than a 512 pitch. The one on the right has greater than or equal to 512. And there are some examples in the middle of what different pitches look like, different silhouettes for buildings. Next slide, please. That's not to say that every house or building has to have a pitched roof. There are ways to be creative. So there's another rule that flat pitched roofs, so those with a pitch of 112 or less, and or shed style roofs with varying pitches are allowed. And again, just different examples. The one on the left has a pretty flat roof. The one on the right is more of an example of two different shed roofs that are combining to create a pitched roof, which is kind of interesting. And then different little images there in the center to give examples of what could be allowed. Next slide, please. There's a rule about dormers, false dormers. So no false or artificial dormers are permitted unless they're on a roof with a pitch of at least 512. So you can see a false dormer being constructed there on the left. It doesn't have any living space, no window, no way to access the living space or to access the air and light from the living space. The one in the middle is a true dormer. There's likely a bedroom or some kind of room there that has direct access to that window. And then on the right, that I was struggling to find some examples, but that is most likely a false dormer, or it could be an example if you imagine there's no extra space above that garage, no bonus room or anything. We'll just go with it that that's a false dormer, but it has a window in it, so it at least looks real.
Millie Ann, can
Yes,
they get
ma'am.
away with a vent and a cover like on the far right of that white house? With a false dormer, only a vent with a cover?
That
That's-
would be something that you could decide if you wanted to add some language to allow that.
I don't think that would be an issue. I see it in town because it vents the roof to stop mildew and mold.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what would be the purpose of making it into a dormer rather than just having it on the eaves, on the end or the face of
Right.
the area under the roof.
Right.
I
Okay.
think the intent here is to discourage extra decorative stuff and to make it more about the aesthetic and the livable space, encouraging more of a livable space and more windows, more eyes on the street kind of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please, JB. Okay, regarding foundations, they need to be poured concrete or masonry block according to the draft rules. And all dwellings need to be permanently connected to foundations and have to meet seismic and wind loading standards for Benton County. And then no more than 12 inches of foundation wall can be exposed on the walls facing a street. So the one on the left probably doesn't have a foundation. And the one on the right has less than or equal to 12 inches of exposed masonry foundation. So it is an example of how this code would look as far as the foundation goes. I did have a typo in the staff report you got when you got a draft version of these slides. The draft version says that picture is showing greater than or equal to 12 inches, and that's incorrect. It's less than or or equal to, which is correct. And would meet this code section. Next slide, please. There are provisions for the kind of materials that are used. So siding needs to be durable materials, and then there's a list of what would be allowed or examples of what could be allowed. And then there is a stipulation that the siding has to extend below the top of the foundation 1.5 to 2 inches, and that a trim board doesn't qualify as siding. And then all trim materials around the windows, doors, corners, and other areas need to be good materials that are not subject to deterioration. Next slide, please. Electric meters need to be not so prominent, so they need to be on a sidewall of a building, not on the front wall facing the street, unless that's completely infeasible. And then it would be up to whoever's reviewing the permit to determine whether it's infeasible. And then that is something that would be determined by maybe consulting with the electric company, whoever provides the electricity. And there would be different factors that would go into that decision, but typically it's not allowed on the face. And then any additions to a building need to be permanently connected so that it becomes an integral part of the dwelling. So you can see in this image, this is not Benton City, obviously, but Perhaps the main structure is the piece on the right, and then they've added on with the piece on the left, and they've connected the whole thing with a breezeway and one continuous roof going over the whole thing, so that as in the picture, you can't really tell where the addition happened. It looks cohesive. Next slide, please. And then the code section that you asked us to add about garages says primary attached garages should not be the prominent element of the portion of the dwelling facing the street. When a garage entrance is located on the same facade as the primary entrance or front door and on lots that exceed 50 feet in width, garages shall be no more than 60% of the structure facade. Additionally, when a garage has more than 2 bays, each additional bay shall be recessed a minimum of 4 feet. So on the left, you can see an example of a garage that's greater than 60% of the facade. In the middle, an example where it's less than 60% of the facade. And then on the right, an example of some creative thinking where the garage is not even on the primary facade. Thanks. So some benefits of design guidelines, they can be aesthetically pleasing. They can up the aesthetics in the area. Provides eyes on the street, particularly with windows and porches and those kinds of interventions. It can be pedestrian friendly. It's nicer to walk by when things look nice. Helps maintain the unique character of Benton City and promotes and maintains developments to enhance the positive image of the city. And the next slide is just some websites that you can check out, or maybe you did check out. And then the last slide is a recommendation, and that recommendation is in your staff report. Staff does recommend approval of this code section. And that is the completion of the staff report. Do you have any questions for me?
If I may, when we were in that meeting that was after the meeting on the aesthetics of the homes, on page 32, line 17, the primary driveway shall terminate in the well, that line, remember when we talked about the driveway going up to the garages? A lot of us that were there agreed that maybe we shouldn't say that. And it says this in 3 different places at least, because we talked about round driveways and some houses that just want a cement pad up the side of their house. I thought that we all agreed on that when we were in that meeting. So I would say that I would, that would be part of my amendment of this, if there is a possibility of that. We
Was
need,
that still in the
yes,
draft that was in the staff report?
yes, we need to revisit that because it's on page 32, line 17.
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, my apologies.
We took that out of the latest version. I'm sorry
Okay.
if that didn't come out. That should have come out. Yes.
It's not allowed
This
unless it's actually the driving.
Last
Hmm.
meeting, and maybe that's why it's still in there, because this says June 23rd.
No, this.
Yeah,
is-
if you look at the current
Okay.
packet as part
All
of
right.
the,
All right, so at least I caught it.
yes.
Okay, and also on page 35, under site plan approval, if you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines and you go over to the right, the objective is not to be design snobs. I don't think that design snobs is an appropriate way to term anyone. It implies that some of us are snobs. I was thinking that design prejudice might be more correct across the board, because that just doesn't sound very professional to me. I'm sure people might say that privately, but design snob isn't really a good way to say that. That's what I think.
And that may have been something that I said in the workshop.
Okay,
That should not be,
I think that's all.
was that in the minutes?
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it is.
So, okay. Page 4 of 17, on the very top, on the very farthest right, it should say I-82 instead of 82 for the freeway. And that's it. That's all I have. So thank you.
Yeah, so we make sure we're all on the same page. The packet that you received should have the SEPA DNS, followed by the SEPA checklist, followed by the draft code
Okay.
language. Does everybody have that? And just so I know what my task is that, thank you, Jeannie. Sorry, I don't have it printed out.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yes, and if you look at that. Nope, you're good. You're good. So if you look at that, you can see where if it's black, it is what was presented to you last time. And then if it's underlined, that is the new language that we added after your comments last time. So there's some changes to section A to incorporate that part about the corners. And then I really want to make sure I didn't accidentally leave that part in about the garages because
Okay.
yes, we did take that out.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to make sure
sure.
that we did it. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Or suggestions or? No questions?
Not on this section.
Okay, so what I do need to tell you is that we received 2 comment letters within the last 24 hours, so they didn't make it into the staff report.
Is that what this is?
Those are the copies, yes.
Okay.
Patrick made copies for everybody and left. Did you get a copy?
You did? Oh, sorry about that.
Here's this one. There you go. Thanks. So one is from Anthony Potts, who represents AAA Renovation and Construction LLC and had several comments. And these letters will become part of the record. Did you have time before the meeting to read
No,
through? Okay. So in the letter, they're requesting rewording section A as it is unduly prohibitive of standardized opening sizes for glazing on the front of a dwelling. And then they go on to explain their reasoning for that. They've suggested that section C be amended from a minimum 512 pitch to a minimum of 412 pitch. And they are citing different reasons for that, talking about lumber and affordability. And then they've suggested that section C to limit foundations to poured concrete or masonry block is limiting in today's construction environment. And it should be amended to allow the use of insulated concrete forms, ICFs, and other innovative foundation products that meet the requirements of the building code. And section G, they're saying is adequate, that they approve of, or they appreciate that it allows T111. Because that saves them time and money. Section K, they've said they disagree with the requirement, basically, and give lots of different reasons for disagreeing. And section O, the word prominent. They've suggested that that section be amended to say to strike the part attached garages should not be the prominent element of the portion of the dwelling facing the street. So they're suggesting to take that out and to just say when a garage entrance is located on the same facade as the primary entrance or front door and on lots that exceed 50 feet in width at the street and on homes not designed with a modern low slope roof theme, garages shall be no more than 60% of the structure facade. Additionally, when a garage has more than 2 bays, each additional bay shall be recessed or projected a minimum of 2 feet, unless the portion of the home facing the street that is not the garage is constructed to be more conspicuous than that of the garage. So that's on page 4. And then they have comments about the last section of the code that talks about exceptions. And they're suggesting that perhaps it should be a different process rather than a CUP. So that is one of the letters, and we can take more time to go through it if you'd like. I just wanted to hit on the high points. And then there is another letter. This one just came in, so I haven't spent a lot of time with it. Oh no, I've got 2 copies of the same thing. Here we go. This one is from the folks at New Tradition Homes. Jarrett Helms is the design manager of New Tradition Homes, sent this letter to provide input specifically regarding section O, which is the one about garages not being the prominent element. And they're saying, in effect, restricting it to 60% of the structure facade would eliminate the opportunity for third garage bays in the R2 and R3 zones. This would negatively affect the majority of citizens and would allow third garage bays only for those who could afford a larger lot and larger home in the R1 district. And the standard requires that a third garage bay would be recessed a minimum of 4 feet from a typical 2-car bay. And the standard is good in theory, but not in practice. In practice, it requires designers to unnecessarily expand garages and or rework adjacent spaces. They have an additional concern with standard C that talks about the main roof being a minimum of 512 pitch. And they're saying that that could increase construction costs for buildings, and they recommend that the language be revised to allow 412 pitch hip roof designs.
I have a few questions about their suggestions. In town, there are garages on houses that have a 2-bay that's 1 garage and a setback that's the 3rd garage. I don't see why that would be a problem to have 2 garage doors in 1 garage and then the 4th one set back. Like, for instance, my little house is a 3-car garage, but I only have 1 bay. If I wanted to widen that or put 2 small car size doors, I could actually do that without changing my home. Do you see where I'm going with this? Like the picture of that one house with the big bay. That is listed probably as 2-car entrance. Like mine is 3-car garage and I only have 1 bay opening.
1 door.
Yeah,
Okay, can I address this, please?
yes.
I think part of what you're thinking is the number of doors, and you need to think about the percentage of the facade itself
Right.
is what they're talking about. So at the point that you've got over 60%, you can have your 2-car set back 4 feet to have the 3rd. Am I correct in this thinking, Millie?
That's what's drafted. Yes.
That's what I'm
that's-
thinking.
That's what's drafted. And it's the percentage that's important, not the number of bays.
Okay, thank you. That's valuable information. It's kind of hard to make these decisions so abruptly, you know, because we did have that elongated meeting where we went over every kind of home. And another question I have is, if we were to reduce the slant of the roof, is that equal to what we've allowed for mobile homes, the factory homes? Would that really be that much of a hindrance to the city to reduce the pitch if it's equal to or slightly greater than what we've allowed for factory homes? They look nice, but I'm not a carpenter.
It would depend on the aesthetics that you're going for.
And there is a spot in there not far from the word snobbish that other houses' plans can be considered upon receiving them, that there's some leeway there. So it's not written in stone anywhere.
No, and
Maybe the builder that's sitting here could tell us what most of the roof pitches are.
Yes, I'm not a home designer.
if you could state your name and speak into the microphone, please.
Yeah, my name is Anthony Potts. I live in Richland, Washington. It's at 2402 Morency Drive. I own AAA Renovation and Construction, also Ambiance Homes. That's what we do business as, and I'm the one who wrote one of the two letters. I'm sorry I didn't get it to you guys a lot sooner because I just didn't know about it until Friday, when thankfully Nicole Stickney with HBL let me know about it. So, but yes, to address your point, I'm building in my subdivision 412 and 512 pitch roofs, just depending on the plan, depending on how it all works out design wise. It was very common back in the early 2000s for everything to be 512 or greater, pretty much. As we've gone on and we've tried to really put a emphasis on affordability, and lumber costs have spiked. It's not just lumber costs, it's petroleum-based products, which are roofing. And siding is also another part that's a piece of that. So I put some notice or some information in my letter to talk about the difference in height on a 50-foot wide building. Going from 412 to 512 adds about 2 feet in height to the pitch to the top of the roof, because you're going up 5 inches per 1/2 of the building width if your gable is like this. So 5 inches in height on a 512 pitch roof per 1 foot of width up to the center point of the gable. So I think that if I had to guess, and not just guess, but a little educated guess, most homes that were built in, like, say, the 60s to the 90s are going to have roof pitches that vary greatly from, they could be 812 pitch roofs, they could be 612 pitch roofs. As you go into the early 2000s, you see a lot of 512 pitch roofs from production builders. And then as we come into the late teens and into the early 2020s, I've built a lot of 3 and 412 pitch roofs. A lot of roofs in wet locations like Seattle area, Vancouver, on the other side of the state are going to have higher pitch roofs because they have a lot more rain and a lot more moss and a lot more debris that falls onto the roofs, which then can cause a lot of deterioration of the roofing structure, more so than in our location. And also snow load can be, not snow load as much as snow can be an issue in your eaves if you don't properly prepare for it, as it can ice dam. And the lower the pitch, you can have leaks into your roofs if you don't do it correctly. That's why we always use ice shield around the edges of our roofs. And on low pitch roofs, we'll actually ice shield the whole thing to prevent any kind of dams from allowing water to come back in and leak out through the soffits. To answer your question, 412 is very common right now, and I believe that 512 would be unduly restrictive to affordability, which would be contrary to your comprehensive plan's housing goals.
Okay. We haven't had this very long, and we're not contractors. I want you to know that even if we do make those recommendations, we're just the legislature. And when it gets to the city council, that's when they make the decisions. They can decide to not go with our recommendations, just so you know. So it's important for you to go there too. So how do we want to proceed, Millie Ann?
So there are a few ways to proceed, and a couple of things I should point out. We can let Mr. Potts, if he has other comments besides just about the roof and you'd like to hear those, we could move on to that. I just want to let you know that there are a few ways that you could proceed tonight. You could you could make a recommendation of approval to the city council as the draft is written right now. You could hold another public hearing in the future, take some more time to read it, suggest some changes, for us to make, to go back and make some changes. If you wanted that, you could hold another public hearing in the future. You could also delay your decision to a date certain in the future. And there really wouldn't be a reason to not hold, to do it that way versus holding another public hearing. So that's sort of what you can do. You can make the decision, or you can decide to talk about it some more at another time.
I have a question on these pictures. What are these 412s, 512? Looks like one's lower, the first one's lower. It doesn't say on the picture. On 7, 8, 9, and 10.
They both look nice.
On 9, it's a 412 pitch.
So like this one,
That one is a 412 pitch. And on page
gotta
9 as
name it.
well, that's a 412 pitch.
Man,
Page
wrong
8 of
letter.
my letter is a 512 pitch.
that's a 512.
And on 10,
And on 10, I do not know, as I didn't build that house. I put that as Stonecrest built that house over in Richland.
That's at least 5 or 6.
yeah, I was gonna say, it seems like it's pretty high.
That was to show the garages being, you know, a house looking okay with garages all on plane, as long as they did something to dress up the home.
Yeah,
And this is about $1 million house.
If we-
I'm looking for the right one. Pardon me.
Are we open for comment? or-
Yes, you may comment.
I think,
Say who you are.
yes, Commissioner Kearns. Or,
It's okay.
I think that standardizing the design is good, but there's also some valuable comments on constructability. And like I read through the overlap on the foundation wall on the front, and I think that as much as, you know, this is talking about the city limits of Benton City, and we have, I don't know, 300 houses that went up in the last, or maybe in the last year and the end of this year, maybe 300 houses. I don't know how much more land there is to even build on here.
A little over 60 acres
60 acres, okay. And so
collectively.
we essentially have 95% of all of the housing built out in the city limits.
That's why there's a moratorium. I was at that council meeting.
But we're not going to change all the double wides that you see coming into Benton City.
No, they're grandfathered in, the ones that are already
Right, so we're
here.
gonna be changing all of the lots that are basically off the main drag that nobody sees anyway, will be. This design update will be applicable to basically all the lots off the main drag.
Well, it'd probably be in a village. It not necessarily anyone could build that once it's in the chapter on any
I just
area.
wanted to add that as perspective, you know, it's like,
The-
we're
This,
not demolishing double wides on our way into Benton City to change the whole aesthetic.
no, the reason I mentioned
Yeah.
double wides is because we've have a pitch for
Yeah.
those, a requirement, and if it's equal to or slightly greater, I don't see the harm in Mr. Potter's idea.
Yeah, I'm actually making this comment in support of adding the language for 412. I just, you know, Benton City isn't Lake Oswego.
No, and it is a pleasing looking home.
Yeah.
It doesn't ruin the aesthetics of the plan. So,
There is a difference.
and one of the pictures of that house with the 3 pitches, that's my friend's house in on Canal. And I was looking at that house, and wow, it has no pitch at all.
Hmm.
So I think that your home looks really good that you want to build, and I don't think it would hurt to be on the main street or in a village or in a small community area.
And it's important to think about the current areas that are undeveloped,
Sure.
but we also want to think, I just want to remind you to think long-term too, because if somebody comes in and they want to rezone to R3 or they want to rezone to R2
Sure.
and put in a subdivision or put in some houses, we want to think about that. And then you want to think about the areas of the city that are within your UGA, but maybe aren't within city limits. So those areas could eventually developed.
Sure.
So we're thinking about that too. And then if the city continues to grow beyond the UGA and the UGA ever expands, these would be rules that could go on in perpetuity.
Sure.
There's that whole, that 2-day workshop there, or public hearing that we had too, for all of those houses. That's the number of houses.
Well, we have a 20-year expansion plan of Benton City that goes farther beyond what we've seen here. So Commissioner Wallace and I both worked on that. And so we realized that the expansion of Benton City is way farther north than anything we've looked at here. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the looks of the home he wants to build. So
So what I'm hearing is that you would like to change the section that requires a minimum 512 pitch to be a minimum 412.
Can-
Council would take that up in consideration and.
well,
consider-
they
You
would in
would-
an amendment.
Yeah, you would recommend one or the other, and then they could
Okay.
discuss it.
Because they make this final decision.
And it would be captured in your meeting minutes that it was discussed, and they could and should read the meeting minutes. I'm glad that was
You-
I
read.
don't know if that's Dawn trying to talk,
I wonder if
No, it's
there-
not.
or if that's Margaret, or if it's picking up something else.
It's not.
Okay,
Margaret's not here. May I address the council?
yes,
If you want that to be in the language, if you want it to be as it is now, it's 512. If you want it to be 412, make it very clear in your recommendation. If it's the only thing you wanted to change, that you accept the language as proposed by AHBL, except the 512 pitch needs to be 412. Make it clear to where what you want as representatives of the city gets to the council to where they understand very clearly what you want, if you're concerned about not having it heard.
yeah, from 410 to
From 512 to
512,
412.
12 to 412. I dropped my pen. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dawn, we can't hear you, but we recognize that you're in the meeting. And if you click,
very much.
if you, okay, all right, so I guess, I'd like to,
Do you want to hear from anybody else
yes,
or the public?
this is the
or-
new, yes, is there anyone from the public that would like to speak at this time? Okay, I have to let the public speak first and then I can let the contractor speak. That's what my other agendas have said previously. So I see that we have Jenny McCombs and Doyle,
Okay, don't worry about.
pardon? Okay,
It doesn't look like you can ask.
They're listening, but they're not participating.
okay, if there's anyone at this time that would like to participate, this is your time for the public.
Don, do you have any comments?
Right now, I don't know if you can even hear me.
We can hear you, Dawn. Now we can't hear you.
Okay, now you muted yourself.
Dawn, you muted yourself. The unmute bottom should be on the bottom right corner of your computer. Is it on the left?
JB, can you unmute him?
Yeah, we can't do it from our end.
No, Margaret can't do it either. That's why she has you call in when you can't be heard.
It's not accepting.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, please try again,
he touched
Dawn.
Something and muted himself.
On the bottom left hand corner of your screen, there should be a mute and unmute button. It's not your picture.
Okay, can we go ahead and hear from somebody else while?
Yes, let's go ahead and hear from someone else. Anyone else have things to say about this? Let's go ahead and since we have no comments from the public and we're waiting for Dawn to be heard, let's go ahead and let the contractor go over what he wants to tell us.
Okay, once again, this is Anthony with Ambiance Homes. And I have a few minor concerns. I really appreciate the fact that the city's going to the trouble of creating this in order to be able to, kind of control the aesthetic beauty of their environment here in Benton City. My company has built nearly 100 homes in Benton City over the years. We're getting pretty darn close. By the time we're done, I think we'll have hit it when we're done with Blacktop Estates. So we have a vested interest in the community. We have somewhere around maybe 15 left to build out in Blacktop Estates. And I imagine at some point in the future, we'll be back in another development as we are Tri-Cities area builders. We got projects going in Prosser, Hermiston, Umatilla, Sunnyside, Kennewick, Pasco. So we're around a little bit. And we appreciate your guys' time. And so I took the time, not because your proposed code directly affects my subdivision in much ways at all. Perhaps I might have to change a roof pitch to 512. Perhaps I'm grandfathered in as I'm a prelim plat prior to this existing code. I believe that most cities would look at my permit applications as not being subject to the new code, but that would be to be determined. So I didn't come at this from I'm upset that the city's doing this standpoint. I came and I spent almost 2 days on this letter in a busy time of our work schedule to just help the city, because I feel like there's a few things in here that, number one, are not in accordance with the comprehensive plan and the extreme need in our communities for affordable housing. The majority of our clients, our customers that have purchased homes in the last year have purchased homes in Benton City because they simply can't afford it, Tri-Cities. They're close to the edge of not being able to afford a house at all. And they've chosen Benton City as a place to build their home because they're tired of losing out, bidding on houses, multiple offers in Tri-Cities. And they've just said, look, we're going to move to Benton City. And that's bringing great, a population of great people to your community. We've had cash buyers from out of state, out of the area. And I think that we've got some good people in our community in Blacktop Estates, as well as our established community of Botaka that we built out. Now, to address the few things, and the majority of it is about feasibility of construction and affordability for your homeowners. And so my focus as a builder is mainly on affordability. I also like to innovate and think about, when I'm building a house, I like to value engineer it, try to make it the best it can be. You'll notice on a lot of my floor plans, I call out specific headers over my windows to save not just our money, but overall, then I can pass that savings on to my buyers. We have the best priced new construction product in the area, under that of Hayden and Aho and other developers. So in an effort to achieve the housing goals of the comprehensive plan, we want to put a focus on affordability and not put restrictive code language in that makes that not possible. So when you move to, for instance, in your first line item that I had some issues with was 20.62.02A, was to standardize the size of the window. So move to something like a 5 foot by 5 foot window, rather than something that would require an 8 foot wide by 4 foot tall window, which is restrictive to affordable housing, period. And if you were to say, well, it doesn't have to be an 8 foot by 4 foot tall window, it could be 2 4 foot by 4 foot windows, which are standardized windows. Those are, running a couple $300 a piece. But each window that you add adds $300, $400, $500 in total costs to the front of that house. And so then that gets passed on to the buyers.
I think that there was wording in there about the glazement and the size of the home, and that there could be multiple windows that would meet the glazement of the chapter that would do just what you're saying.
Right. But in affordable housing, it's very common to put one window on the
Mhm.
front of the house in order to keep the housing price down for affordability reasons. And so I was suggesting, rather than do a 32 square foot window, which is like 8 foot by 4 foot, or maybe it's 7 foot by 5 or 6 foot 2 by 5 or something like that, make it something that's very a common sized window, and one window is my preference on that. So that's why I suggested 25 square feet. If you look at Pasco's code, they suggest 30 square foot. So maybe that's a 6 foot by 5 foot window. You definitely don't want to go like 6'2" by 5 foot, because now you've got a non-standard window size and it's going to cost a lot more money for the builder. So that's why I suggested 5 by 5, because if you were to look at page number 8, actually, that is a 6 foot by 5 foot window on page number 9, sorry. And on page number 8, you have a 5 foot by 5 foot window, which I believe meets the criteria of what we were talking about, interacting with the street. That's page 8 of my letter. That is my 1375 plan. And I believe that that meets kind of what the city's goals are, to give, some access out to the street. It's not, blocking that. And that's a 5 foot by 5 foot window on page number 8. Page number 9 would be a 6 foot by 5 foot window.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I just was getting on to the right letter.
Okay. And then, so that was number 1 as kind of an issue for me. I just think that we're opposing affordability when we start saying, well, no, there's got to be either 2 windows or an 8 foot by 4 foot window, but it's just really not necessary. And as your comprehensive plan also talks about trying to accommodate for townhomes and stuff like that. When you start moving into townhouses, I build a lot of townhouses, you really get limited to a small window on the front of the house, depending on the overall size of the house. But if you're trying to, kind of squish them together, then you're going to end up with a small window on the front of the house. But you also have the alternative of a 4 foot patio cover, which I really greatly appreciate, because I think that having that alternative is a good option. I just think that if you would move to a standard size, even if it's 30 foot or 25 foot, as I suggest, I think that that would be a much better option for affordability. We've already talked about the 512 versus 412 pitch. I give a lot of reasons as to why in my letter. And I just believe it to be, I do a lot of those, funny pitch roofs, I call them clear views, where you got multiple different pitches on a shed roof that all kind of come together to create an aesthetically pleasing design in today's design culture. And, for instance, I have a house, my 1,400 square foot plan that I built here in Pasco as a craftsman style. I also build, here in Benton City as a craftsman style, also build in Pasco with a modern theme. And that modern theme, I build it as a duplex, and on the main portion of the home, it's a 412 pitch roof. And then on the front portion of the home, and by 412 pitch, I mean it's 412 pitch standard gable, right? And then on the front portion of the home that faces the street, it's clear views, which clearly meet the intent of your code. I could build that here, except I can't, because the center of the home has a standard gable that's only 412, and it doesn't meet the criteria of being one of those shed roof styles with alternating pitches. What that did then was, in order to be able to build that in Pasco, I had to make that another shed roof style roof. So I dropped the back pitch down, and now there's this funny little overhang that you can't even see from the street. It's not for aesthetic designs. The only reason I did it was to meet the code, and it added a bunch of cost for no reason at all. Nobody cares. Nobody sees it unless you can see the back of the house. So I just think that adding, a 512 pitch is an unduly restrictive thing. So I would request that the city use that to a 412 pitch and keep the language in there about the architecturally integrated design. I believe that was pulled out of Pasco's code or some other code boilerplates, and because Pasco has that same code.
Okay.
I think that's Jenny coming on to help you on.
Okay.
He went to his house to help him.
I think he's got more. to continue on.
No,
Yeah.
there's nobody else live up there. They're just listening.
Okay. So are all those pretty much your issues?
No, I got several more and so we have on foundations. ICF forms, insulated concrete forms are very common, but I believe that your code limits a builder not to do them. And they're not just very common, especially in more custom homes. I don't build ICF at all. I don't use that product, but they're also a much more energy efficient way to build homes. And by limiting foundations to just masonry block or poured concrete, you get rid of the options for innovative products. There are actually products out there that are made out of forms of plastic, recycled plastics that are kind of like Lego blocks. And you're basically saying, hey, custom home builders and people who want to build fancy homes, you just can't do that. And the state is putting a massive push right now on energy. Yeah, and it's actually going to get a lot worse in our next code cycle. And that's going to end up being one of their credits that you can choose to meet their criteria is going to be insulated concrete forms that are going to give you part of your requirements to meet their code. And you're going to say, no, I can't do that. So I request respectfully that the city amend that, not for my sake, but for, other builders and other homeowners' sake that wish to use that. And we already talked about the T111, or Millyanne did. Thank you, Millyanne. On the siding overlapping the foundation, this is an identical code to what's in Pasco's residential design standards. It's been in there as long as I've been building. I started building in Pasco and it was in there and there. Then I believe that at some point or another, builders were building houses and their siding wasn't touching the top of the foundation, and you could see the bottom plate, you could see the framing, and somebody was like, that's ugly, right? And so somebody in Pasco or somewhere, wherever they adopted this code, likely said, hey, we want to make sure that overlaps. And I say, okay, we'll make sure it overlaps, but don't tell me I have to go 1.5 to 2 inches. This isn't a structural integrity issue. This actually potentially gets my siding way closer to the dirt and more susceptible to rot. I don't necessarily like the idea that I have to be told, 1.5 to 2 inches overlapping the foundation from somebody who's really only looking at an aesthetic point of view. Why can't you just tell me overlapping the foundation? If I'm a 1/4 inch, that's fine. If I'm 1/8 of an inch, that's fine. If I basically touch it, but you can't see it, that should be fine. But to say I have to be 1.5 to 2 inches is simply adopting somebody else's code that probably was in response to a situation that they had, some builder who was, not doing a very good job, and then adopting that into your code for really no reason. And then they've said in further, because what most likely happened, and I can only surmise, but most likely the builder said, well, if I have to overlap the foundation, I'll just put a piece of trim board on. And Pasco probably said, well, no, you can't do that. That just doesn't look good. But then again, now we start talking about affordability. So when I overlap, and I'm using sheet goods for my siding, T111, on the rear and sides of my homes, and I have to overlap that foundation by 2 inches, now I got to buy an extra foot length on my T111, so that it can reach down that far. An 8-foot sheet won't cover it. So now what ends up happening is I've got to throw away about 10 inches of wood every sheet of use that and those are very expensive. So it limits affordability, and the comprehensive plan speaks specifically to affordability. So to limit affordability just for something that says, well, no, you got to be 2 inches. For
How
no
many,
reason.
I have a question. How many feet are your seams? Your seams
Yeah, so they're
per
at
level?
they're at 8 foot. Yeah.
Okay,
Unless
so
you go
you'd
to a
have to
9-foot
buy
sheet.
9-foot sheets.
Yep. And that's more expensive. It's not held as commonly in stock by our suppliers, and it can become an issue. And you're throwing away 10 inches approximately.
Right.
So I've talked about that in my letter. I'd ask you to take that into consideration. I also don't see why you can't put a piece of trim on. If the piece of trim is not susceptible to rot, or it's made to, you know, withstand outdoor weather, as long as people aren't letting their sprinkler just spray it all the time, then why can't you? What's wrong with that?
I would object to it just lipping a seam because of rot. Because I've seen that before. And my objection to using the trim as the overlay is that I've seen a lot of that buckle, especially in factory homes. And this will overlap to factory versus stick built.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about the 512 pitch roof and the 412 pitch roof is that you're basically limiting mobile homes can't be built unless they have a 512 pitch roof in an R2 designated zoning or whatever is under this code.
That's why I mentioned it to Millie Ann,
Right.
that it needs to be compared. Because I was uncertain about the pitch amount in a factory home.
I don't know what they are, but they're pretty low. Oftentimes my guess is 3 to 412. They got to be able to take them down the freeway, get under overpasses.
Yeah, I went out and looked at the ones that are here in town and I was trying to visualize whether they could be here after this is signed. You know, I mean, they're grandfathered in, they're not moving anywhere. I mean, additional ones that match.
They would be subject to this code, I believe,
Yes, they would.
which means that no more manufactured homes unless they're an upgraded version in these communities.
There's already rules of where they can be seated and not, but still, we don't want to discriminate against people who can afford a factory home versus a stick-built home.
I think we should address those. in two different sections.
There's-
Because I agree, but I'm not sure it's housing construction will be.
Right, and the whole idea of having rules for it is because we don't want the flat mobile homes on Main Street, you know, we want them to look pleasant with the actual homes that are being built, so.
I think that, you know, to clarify what you're saying, from my understanding of the code, and I've dealt with, I speak to planners, I speak to building officials all the time. I'm always looking through the code and finding what I can and can't do. And I think that Millie Ann might correct me if I'm wrong, but unless you omit or exclude mobile homes from this criteria, they will absolutely be required to follow this if they're built in that zoning, if they're permitted in that zoning.
Yeah,
So
and we don't want to do that. I don't think. And there's so many amendments that you have that I think making a decision tonight would be the wrong move. I mean, I suppose we could take a vote on it or we could discuss it and decide.
Well, and that's why my question was if we could make a decision to forward some of these questions to the council for ultimate decision. While giving overall approval on the revision with the exception. But I guess some pending questions, which I don't think are free to.
I think your job is to represent the people. The planning
Yes.
commission, to listen to the people and make a recommendation to the council members, right? So if you are unsure of what you want to pass on, you have the ability to have another session, to study what's here before you, and to where you truly understand the second, third, and fourth level consequences of your decision, okay? Of course, council has final decision, but your recommendation weighs heavily with them, or it should. So I would tell you, I'm not a citizen of Benton City at this point, but I would tell you that if I was, I would want you to understand and fully think through the process before you make the recommendation or leave that decision to somebody else where they might make a decision that is not yours. So
Right.
you do have the ability to say, we want to study it more before we make a decision.
Well, I think that would be fair because we haven't had time to read this, and normally, as you could see, I had all kinds of notes. And what you've said has been very valuable. But like Commissioner Wallace said, we might need a separate section for mobile homes and the height, because I know Commissioner Wallace and I, we go out and measure and look at property and look at the homes and, you know, stuff that your general person are not aware of. You know, we do a lot of footwork. And so your homes are aesthetically pleasing. Your pictures looked very nice. But we do need to make the distinction between factory homes and stick-built homes, and we need a separate section. So I guess, I think we need another meeting to go over this.
Are we still open for public comments?
I haven't closed the public comments.
Perfect. So I got a few more things to go over with, and I agree with you. I think it would be a great plan to just sit down and look at it a little more closely. I'm sorry that I haven't been able to be involved in the prior workshops and other stuff, and I'm submitting this at the last minute. I didn't know this was happening, and I apologize. I didn't receive notice. I don't read the newspaper.
Where do you live?
Richland.
Richland? That's why you did not receive the announcements.
But I have a lot of properties in Benton City and business license in Benton City, and I develop in Benton City. I would have hoped that my business would have received a announcement, but I think there's been maybe staff turnover and stuff that may have caused.
We've had a lot of staff turnover.
And there's no requirement to send out letters for a legislative public hearing.
Sure.
It's published in the newspaper and in a couple other places.
Yeah, I wasn't questioning your requirements. I'm sure you guys have met your requirements.
I've been here 3 weeks. Got me a
Right.
little bit of
Sorry.
slack.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm not trying to
Um,
throw anybody under the bus. I'm just trying to help. And thank you for stating that our community is, pleasing to the eye. Of course, it is a more affordable community. There may be other communities that have more amenities and whatnot, but we are trying to produce an affordable product. And I do think that it does look nice enough and would meet most of the intent of most codes. But there are some things that under this code that we have built out there that wouldn't work in the code. I under the garage shouldn't be the prominent feature of the front of a house. And the reason why I've asked you to strike that out is because I did some research on what the word prominent means, and it can be defined as most conspicuous. And garages in general are almost always the most conspicuous portion of the front of a house on a front load garage.
Well, when we had our meeting, we talked about garages, and my house has all of the pleasing aesthetics that we've listed. Unusually, we have the 4-foot setback for the front door. We have the 4-foot hangover. I have a hangover about this much that goes to my garage that makes my home the pleasing thing, not my garage.
Sure.
And that was one of the stipulations when I bought my home. And plus I wanted a corner lot.
Right.
And so I understand that that's important and it's something that they need to think over.
Yeah.
We need to rethink it ourselves. And we also need the council to think about it too. So I think that we need another meeting. What do the other, let's close the public hearing at 7:17, and I want to know from the other commissioners if you all agree on having another meeting about this.
Are you making a motion?
I'm making a motion
Are
that
you
we
call-
have
Are you
another,
calling for a motion?
I'm calling for a motion. Whether we should have another meeting on this.
Could I ask a question?
Yes,
If you have another
it's
meeting,
Millyanne.
oh, it's, yes, Millyanne Van Divender. If you have another meeting, could you provide, would you like for us to make modifications to the draft ordinance as it is? Are there specific items you would like to see changed? or-
Yes, I would like you to add pitch level for factory homes. As far, because he wants to go from 512 to 412. I'm not aware of what a mobile home pitch is required. And I think it needs to be separate from a stick-built house.
And I think that was my
Well, manufactured homes that are built elsewhere and placed on the site are treated the same as a site-built home. If they are
Okay.
allowed in the zone, and they have to be allowed in the zone. So when you're talking about an RV or a mobile home that could be moved at any point, that is different. And those are only allowed in certain areas, but a manufactured home that's brought in and placed on the site is allowed as if it were a regular building, and that's in the code. And I'd have to verify, but I think that is a state requirement.
Okay, well, that's something that I would like for you to verify that and look at what the consequences are of changing it from 512 to 412. Go ahead.
Commissioner Kearns, I think it's Anthony Potts. I think Mr. Potts had a lot of very valid considerations. I don't think you got a chance to go through quite all of them. I think we should take these to heart and look at them. Stated goal of affordability, I think he makes a compelling point that a lot of these items are based on the constructability of our plan. So I think we should take those to heart and look at them. I think there is a large majority of the housing in Benton City is, maybe, or we're wanting to gear it towards affordability.
Right,
So-
I completely agree with you, and I don't really
so maybe
think
this
that,
letter can be incorporated into our review on the next meeting.
yes, that would be a good idea, because personally, I don't build homes, but I don't see the hazard in changing that. But I would like Millie Ann to review it and see what can be done with that. And also the garage restriction of 60% of the home. It'd be wise to look at that too, to see what the difference is between a 2-car garage and then the third setback, or if you have to have 2 different garages, if you had 3 and kept setting them back 4 feet, that's a long ways. So I'd like that to be looked at.
So are there suggestions on other ways to make the garage less prominent, to make the focus on the dwelling part of the house rather than the garage? Because the direction that we
Yes.
were given the last time during the workshop was to come up with code language that would require that the garage be less
Well,
obvious.
the overhang would do that. It does it to my house.
So a second story overhang.
I think so.
Perhaps we could require pink paint on the front door side to draw attention to that.
Smack.
And there are other,
Something to swat
it
him with.
could be rephrased. So, and I know I'm very familiar with the design guidelines for another city in Washington of similar size to Benton City. And their design guidelines say that, there's the regular setback for the house, which is, I believe in their city, it's 15 feet or
Mhm.
10% of the lot. So let's say you have a 15-foot setback, and then they say, no matter what your setback is, the face of your garage has to be set back 20 feet.
Right.
The face of the garage door, if it's going to face the street where people walk by, the garage door face has to be set back 20 feet.
That won't work in Benton City.
Okay. I'm just trying to throw out ideas of like how we could massage the code to make it the way that you want it to be.
Right.
I have an ongoing thought about
name.
like all of these.
Need to use your name.
I think, Commissioner Kearns. I have this thought of like all of these suggestions that Mr. Potts made, and then also the structure of our code. Is there a way to add language that states something like industry standard proposals that differ from this code language can be entertained by X governing body and considered for approval? And like an example of Mr. Potts, he had a full subdivision and they all had 412 pitches. There could be a way to add the language to where, okay, you can do a 412 pitch and this is his proposed garage layout. Even if it doesn't meet the standard, it can be approved.
There is an exception.
There is.
section
I'm
at the
looking
end.
for it.
Okay.
that you can go through a process for that. It's also possible if you want to just scrap the roof part, that whole section. And because this code that's drafted here should be a starting point. It should be just some language to get Benton City headed down the road for design guidelines. And then you could always add to it later
And change it next year.
and change it next
And
year.
like his suggestions, I think what we have right here is we have contractor real world input in,
Mhm.
that's relevant to our area.
Mhm.
And if we ended up having proposal for a bunch of condos on the side of by the new gas station, it could be that this code is too restrictive for them. And so almost allowing input from the field, you know, and then if the housing market keeps going up and they have to figure out how to make a house for everything keeps going up and becomes more restrictive, there may need to be even more latitude in
Mhm.
the design components. I don't know.
I think it's Commissioner Lynn. I think it's really important what he's saying and because moved into Mountain View and there's no one from this area. There's two people that moved there from Richland. One is a person that got a divorce and so she had a house and she didn't want as large a one. And so she moved over and another one was a couple from Richland that had a 2-story house and they couldn't go up and down the stairs anymore. So they wanted a 1-story house, which those houses all are, but there's no one local. And I think it's really important that we need some affordable housing in this area and that we need to look at that so that we're not. I think it's just important, these people that have been here all their lives, we can't drive them out and their families out to do this. And however, I don't know, I'm just passionate about it. However
Yeah.
that happens, I think that that's just really important.
I agree with you.
But these codes only apply to new construction. They will not be retroactively.
Everything that's built already is grandfathered in. And we have a moratorium, so we have time.
Mhm.
And he's already building homes. So there's a chance he is.
Michelle,
Yes,
this is Don Allen, and when I understand right now you have a motion before the floor. Has that been decided one way or another? Because I would like to speak when that comes about.
it has not, Dawn. We are trying to decide whether we need another meeting and for Millie Ann to maybe revise some of them so that we can read it and have a better understanding of what we're being told and what decisions we should make in the chapter, which is the ordinance.
Okay, I understand that. I was going to ask Mr. Potts a question, but I couldn't get in, but I was going to ask him a question. Can I still do that?
Yes,
I would like to know some numbers, or do you have numbers of the cost effectiveness of how much this is going to bring towards a house? If you're trying to get people in this city to buy homes and build homes here, and they're here because of the fact that it's cheaper than it is in the Tri-Cities. And if you make these changes of what we're trying to do here, how much increase is that going to be on an average per home that you're going to build? Or do we have those kind of numbers, or is that's something I'm sure is an interest to you, but I'm just curious about that.
thank you, Dawn. Can you expand on that with your name?
Yeah, this is Anthony with Ambiance Homes. You know, I always have a trouble answering numbers questions simply because the question about numbers is the answers vary so much with per house plan, right? So you have to create like averages in order to be able to answer it. And, you know, moving from a 412 pitch to a 512 pitch is likely going to add to a small affordable house, right? Because that's what I'm building right now. So that's my perspective. The lens I'm looking through is probably going to add $1,500 to $2,000, right? To a house. If you talk about somebody wanting to add a third bay to their garage and they got to set it back 4 feet and they got to meet some other criteria. Basically, you know, the Mr. Jared at New Tradition Homes, I like the man, good guy, used to work with him many years ago. He made the comment that with 60% of the facade or the garage being limited to 60% of the facade, you can't you can't achieve affordable housing and achieve a third car garage as well. I had actually the same verbiage written. And then I started thinking about facade. What does facade mean? Well, there's no definition of facade in your code. So my original thought is the facade width was the width of the foundation of the front of the home. On a single story home, he's very correct in that if it's a hip roof home, single story, or a flat roofed home, single story, you can't do a 3-car garage and keep it affordable, period. It's going to add $50,000 in cost because now your house has to get bigger in order for that house, the garage, to have 60% maximum width. So yeah, the 3-car garage thing could be a $50,000 bill to a homeowner that should be only a $15,000 bill.
Well, they might need to, this Michelle McLeod, they might have to address the setbacks too, because for one seam, which is one level of a rambler, it's 5 on one side and 10 on the other. And so as you add garages and width to your home, that might affect that, and lot size, and where we can allow that and who can have it and who cannot. So
Yeah, to answer the question on cost, it's going to really depend very greatly on the size of home, how the home's built. But I would suggest that, depending on which piece it is of that code that you're thinking, it's going to be between $5,000 and $15,000. Take into account, into consideration, please, the next energy code cycle coming out is going to add $40,000 in cost minimum to all new construction across the board, as they add solar as a minimum requirement. So they're adding solar as a minimum requirement to build houses with the next energy code cycle. $40,000 per house on average. And then you're going to add 5,000 here maybe. And then if they want a 3-car garage, they probably got to make their house bigger. So now affordability is no longer a thing for 3-car garages. So you're really creating kind of maybe possibly, you just got to think about all those different perspectives. There is some limitations that can be created in the future with your code language.
right, because if you have a 2-seam house and you're putting 3 garages on it, you're going to have a pretty big lot.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Depending on your perspective. What he didn't mention is the fact, and I think you had incorrect on your slide, Millian, no offense, is that a two-story house, she mentioned that this one didn't meet the criteria on the slide because it had a 3-car garage and it was over 60% of the facade. I doubt that because it was a 2-car. So the 2-story. So the upper story would count as the facade, unless it doesn't. It's not defined in the code. Is if the facade is the entire front of the house, including gables and second stories, then a 3rd-car garage is going to fit within the 60% parameters. If it's a single-story house with hip roofs where the eaves just land right at the 8 or 9 foot top plate, then you're not going to be able to achieve 60% on a 3-car garage unless it's a big house. So 2,000 square foot approximately and above. So it limits affordable home buyers entirely on new construction. Plus your 4-foot requirement is very restrictive and very construction prohibitive and way outside the norm. 2 would be acceptable in most design standards. And you like 2 when you see it. You think it meets the intent of your code. I'm certain of that.
Okay, Don, are you happy with his answer?
I am. I would like to add something to that if I could. What I'm concerned about is that all this that we're trying to do, I understand if we want people to come to this city and they want to be able to afford a home in our area, it's a magnet that shows that if we care enough about them, that we will try to make it affordable for them to live here and to build a home that they can be happy with, at the same time meet the criteria. And if this is what we're trying to do is way over what they can afford, then that's going to keep those buyers from coming here. And
You
so
missed some of the meeting, Don.
What's that?
You missed some of the meeting. And so
I gotta admit.
this is about doing the codes, and he wants to change the roof from 5.12 to 4.12. to
talking
make it
about-
lower. Yeah, the pitch of the
Yeah.
home to
Yeah.
make it more affordable. And he also talked about plywood being, or siding being 8 foot. And that doesn't give room to drop it down around the foundation. So he's saying that he has to lose 11 inches every time that happens. And our code says that you cannot use trim as the edging around the cement foundation.
Okay.
And also he talked about the foundations and that we need to relook at the type of foundations that we allow, because there's foundations that will come in that aren't acceptable. And
Mhm.
so I think that there's enough suggestions and problems with this paperwork that we received, and we haven't been able to read the other two paperworks. We've just been glancing back and forth at the numbers
Mhm.
that perhaps Millie Ann can have it revised for another meeting. I'm not sure, but that's what my recommendation is.
May I have the floor?
Yes.
I think that's probably a good idea that you do have another meeting with this. You get more into detail of what needs to happen or not happen.
Right. We were
And,
also, sorry to interrupt, Don, but
Positive.
we're also talking, he was talking about the 60% width of a home being the garage and a 4-foot setback for additional garages. So there's some serious items here that we need to look at
Yeah,
a later
agree.
date.
yes.
This
I
is
think that's-
Commissioner Kearns. Hi, Mr. Allen. Just for clarification, most of the suggestions that Mr. Potts posed to the commission were based on creating a code that would make building houses more affordable, not less affordable. So his interest in providing all the suggestions were to allow our code to have a little more latitude to where affordable housing was still achievable in Benton City. So I think his pointing out multiple items was his way of suggesting that maybe we wanted to consider a more expansive or a less restrictive code, and that would be in the interest of Benton City's stated goal of affordable housing. So I think most of the suggestions were in line with the affordability goal that Benton City has. So I think that's maybe something to take into
I
consideration.
stand corrected.
Yeah.
No, your points were very valid and they match what we're talking about. So the only thing that I wasn't too certain of is leaving a foundation crack between siding and a foundation, because I wouldn't do that if I was building a shed.
So may I make a suggestion?
Yes, please.
Could we go
This is Millie
through-
Ann.
Yes. Could we go through each section briefly and just very briefly tell me whether you feel it's okay the way it is, or you think it needs to be fixed in some way, and then maybe give a hint as to how you would like it fixed. And that way I know which code sections we can just leave alone and which ones I can work on revising. Would that be an efficient way to work?
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so for the windows, the glazing, 32 square feet. Are we good with 32 square feet?
I don't remember what size that he referred to.
25.
25.
Suggested 25.
Well, I think it needs to be addressed.
Hey, when you're talking 32 square feet, you're talking about, for an example, a 4x8 window or a combination thereof. But that's the measurement that you're looking at. So that kind of gives you a perspective of how much you're talking about. I just brought that up.
Which could be accommodated in several windows, or perhaps if you're into it, windows in the garage or the garage door, or side lights for the front door, or a window in the door. There are different ways to configure.
Yeah, comment thereof, right?
It could be reduced. There was another suggestion for 30 square
Mm-hmm.
feet.
we could say 30 square feet or more, depending on the specs of the home.
Yeah, the size of it. That was Commissioner Lynn, that's what I was thinking. I mean, if you had a really tiny window in a big house, but it doesn't sound like he's making huge houses. He's trying to make an affordable house. And, you know, the square footage isn't necessarily gonna be large, so that, maybe that 25 or 30 would look fine in that, but if he built like a 2,500 or, a larger house, it would look a little funny if you had just a small window in it. So I would think it, you would accommodate it, that he would agree that you would accommodate it to the size of the house.
So
Okay, so let's change that to 30 and then you can
Well,
see
hang on a minute. Hang
how
on a
that
minute.
fits next time.
What I'm saying is that maybe you could think about the idea of a percentage of the face of the building, if that has to be, so much of it has to be glazing. Comparison to the size of the wall, of how much of it has to be glazed and how much doesn't in income total.
So that is an idea. That's a valid suggestion. I would say that it would add more time to the review. There would have to be more calculations, and more
Right.
training,
It
more
would.
training of builders, home builders, because they would have to start providing that information to expedite.
It might be more complicated.
Yeah, versus providing a size of window, everybody can sort of grasp that.
Yeah, okay. got it.
But
Madam Chair,
that could work.
a comment. Although the percentage sounds good, I worked in the window industry when I was a very young man, and there are standard sizes, which makes a percentage. It sounds really good, but it's going to be hard to achieve.
So I'll revise that to say 30 and then we can discuss it more at that point, if that doesn't sit
Yeah, like
well with everybody.
30 depending on the size of the home. You don't want to put a small window in a big home. So
These are minimums though.
Yeah,
minimum.
this is a minimum.
Okay, then 30 and above.
I don't think anybody could buy a house that a monster street view with one-time.
Well, I would hope not.
And there's always the option to provide that 4-foot or deeper overhang for the front door. Okay.
Okay.
So are there any questions or issues with the landing areas, porches, sorry, being constructed as an integral part of the dwelling architecture? I haven't heard any comments on that.
I don't have a problem
Everybody's
with
good with
that.
that. Okay, we'll leave that one. The next one is the eave overhangs. Any questions or issues with suggestions with eave overhangs?
I'm fine with the eave overhangs.
Okay. And then we've talked about the 512 versus the 412. And we're going to revise that to 412. And I'm going to get you some information on manufactured homes. 412.
Okay, I agree with that. Do you guys?
I have a question first, and perhaps you.
This is Commissioner Wallace.
Oh, Commissioner Wallace here. I was wondering with the future requirements for the solar panels, what pitch would accommodate those or not, or if that's still an open question.
Yeah, that's not my area of expertise.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's not on our agenda either.
Well, you
So,
mentioned it.
yeah.
earlier.
It's a great question. I think about that on my house. So,
Yeah, well, and
yeah.
that's what I didn't-
okay, so that sounds like a
Okay,
good
so-
plan to me.
Flat pitch roofs, no comments on that to accommodate. Okay.
Nope.
Artificial dormers. Any comments on that? Strike, keep, questions, comments?
I think it's kind of restrictive. I don't know. Is there, I thought that they would add character to the roof. Maybe it's personal preference, but it seems like I'm not sure exactly what it's in here, but
Would you like to strike it? Is there support for taking that section out?
I'm in favor of getting rid of any codes that could add unnecessary rules.
Well, if there is a false dormer, it needs to have a vent or it needs to appear to be a window, because otherwise it's just some big triangular eyesore.
So perhaps leave it, but specify that it has to have a window or vent.
Yes,
In other
because that would
words-
give it a purpose. It
Okay.
would vent the roof if there was a vent there.
Okay. All right. Is that good, Commissioner Kurtz? Okay. Foundations must be poured concrete or masonry block.
How about you add to that, or approved industry standard building material?
Yeah.
That sounds good.
How about foundation shall be approved industry standard building?
Or equivalent to the interior.
So if we say approved industry standard,
Standard.
there would need to be, yeah, what's the
There would
standard?
need to be a
It would need to
standard.
refer to a standard, or there would need to be a list, or there would, but I
Okay.
could try to come up with some
So
language.
maybe you could keep it as poured concrete masonry block. Or, I mean, there's always new things that are coming out.
Right.
You could add-
Or,
you could add ICF.
Equivalent
or
to industry
other
standards.
Industry building material. Pending approval or as approved by. Like they can submit it and it can get approved. If they're.
Sphinx Engineering looks at everything that gets done.
I can work on that to try to come up with some language. I think I understand what you mean. It
Yeah, I mean,
needs
it's
to be,
ICF. I've got a friend.
needs
who
to be a
makes-
durable material, something that's not
Yeah.
gonna rot away
It's not river rock with. grout.
or dry stack or something.
Right.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Okay, so I'll work on that. Okay, and then siding made of durable materials. Good with that, or,
Yes,
okay, all siding must extend below the top of the foundation, 1.5 to 2 inches. There's been a lot of comment on that. What direction do you want to go?
I would like it to extend maybe 1.25 inches, maybe.
So you're still gonna be driven into that 9-foot siding section.
Yeah.
Well, it has to overlap, from the seam of the home, the bottom seam, to the foundation, because you cannot have that open and you cannot use trim to trim it.
Okay, so
Well,
what
to
if we
mask it.
said all siding must extend below the top of the foundation? Something like in order to conceal all seams?
Foundation.
Yeah, foundation seams.
Do you have a proposal on how you could, if we're in the interest of cost efficiency, what? So a normal stud wall, it frames out at 8 feet exactly, or what?
Anthony with Ambiance Homes. A normal wall frames out at 8 foot, 1 1/8 inch. And it has, so we're able to get away with an 8-foot sheet
Okay.
by putting a piece of not T111, sorry, LP 1x4 at the top, and then sliding the sheet to the bottom of that, and then that usually does come down and cover that gap. I'm just requesting that it doesn't be restricted to 1.5 to 2 inches, just that it covers.
Okay, I just want it to lip over the edge of the concrete.
Okay. And then all trim materials around windows, doors, corners, and other areas must be cedar or other approved materials that are not subject to deterioration.
Yes,
Nobody uses cedar. It's all LP or like.
Or equivalent.
It just needs to be something durable.
yes,
Electric meters must be securely attached to an exterior sidewall. Meters are not permitted to face the street upon which the dwelling is addressed unless infeasible.
I agree with that.
Okay,
This is Anthony.
May I add something here?
Go ahead, Dawn.
Yeah, on electric meters, are we talking about underground service or above? Or was that
No.
been addressed?
We're talking about the PUD meters for the electricity needs to be behind your home, or it needs to be okay with the design standards of your home. If it
Okay.
has to be in the front, it just can't be unsightly. It needs to
Okay,
be positioned correctly.
Okay, I got that. I was just curious about the idea of the services going to these homes, whether they would be underground, would they not?
Well, the electrical would be, that's not what we're talking about, Don. We're talking
I-
about what's from the ground up.
Yes, okay.
For the meter that's read by the meter reader.
Right, that's
We're
all
just talking the
determined.
meter itself.
That's all
okay.
determined in a different chapter of the code.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay,
This is Anthony with Ambiance Homes. I don't have any problem with that code. I just believe that it's worded incorrect. If you read it, it says it can't be on the front of the home unless infeasible, which to me means if it's infeasible to put it on the front of the home, you can't put it on the front of the home.
well, we
It's
just
just
want
worded
them
wrong.
all to be in character with the homes next to them.
Agreed.
And if you're running the lines, that's the cheapest, most feasible way, is to have it all in cohesion with each home as they're built. So the design standard would most likely be that. But if it's a home that's a singular home that's put in and there's no other way to put that in, then it has to at least not be unsightly from the road. I think that's what she's saying.
I think that the intent of the code is correct. I think the code is worded wrong, in my opinion, to state it incorrectly, what the intent is. That's. So I'm asking for the wording to be adjusted. So
What do
Says-
you think, Millyanne?
Meters are not permitted to face the street upon which the dwelling is addressed unless infeasible.
so unless it's infeasible to face the street upon which it's addressed, is my point.
No, it would
Unless
only
it's-
be in the front of the home if it was
Infeasible to
infeasible to
place
put in back. Just
elsewhere.
add those words. There you go. Thank you. That makes sense.
Okay. All additions and or other architectural features must be designed and permanently connected to the dwelling so as to be an integral part of the dwelling. Comment, questions? Good.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yes. Okay. All right, garages. What do we want to do about garages? One thing that we could do is garages shall be no more than 60% of the structure facade. We could change that to say 60% of the width of the facade. We could change this code up so that it encourages more, I don't know how to word this, but more, it encourages the dwelling part of the building to be the prominent face of the building, which is what the guidance was that you gave at the workshop.
Yeah,
Is that how do we diminish the appearance of the garage?
we did that with the overhang that stretches the width of the home.
So perhaps adding some options for how to diminish the appearance
A
of the garage.
12-inch overhang.
So a 12-inch overhang of a second story.
May I recommend windows in the garage doors? That would,
Well-
it would change the appearance.
I would love to have windows in my garage.
But they're a lot more expensive.
Yes, they are. They're more expensive. I don't think I want to make people to have it, even though I would like to have that.
An option. And meet the requirements.
Well,
You
I
could-
think you
she
need to
could
think
say
about those
that,
options.
That
What-
windows in the garage is an option to meet the phasing requirements of the home.
Okay, so I can work on that. And then when a garage has more than 2 bays, each additional bay shall be recessed a minimum of 4 feet. Comments, questions, suggestions? Reduce it to 2.
I think that would be more pleasing to the eye.
Why can't it be projected instead?
Because that is,
So it could be either recessed or projected 2 feet. All you're looking for is a break of the-
so the direction that I was given during the workshop was that Planning Commission wanted to see the garages, the appearance of garages diminished so that there's more emphasis on the dwelling part of the house. And by bringing the garage farther forward, it farthers, they're called snout nose houses when the garage is way far forward of the door. Because as you're driving or walking by, you see the garage first. That's the prominent element.
And it limits the parking in front of the home when your garage pops out. And my house, I keep referring to it, it's a rambler. And I have the inset of the door, I have the 4 foot of the porch, and I have an overhang about that far that my porch goes over the front of my garage. And my home is the focal point of the house at 1201 Fig, if you want to see it. Fig Street. I have a big addition too. So my Rambler is bigger than most people's, but the pleasing aesthetic of it is that my garage is not the focal point of my home. It's a yellow house at 1201 Fig. And so,
Goes back to my suggestion of the pink.
no, I can't have a pink house. I can sing about a pink house, but I can't have one. I don't think that would work on my street. But,
Okay, so I think I've got some good information here that I can work with and bring back to you
thank you.
at another public hearing. Is that what you would like to do?
I think we're going to have to because
Okay.
we haven't seen it
So you-
revised yet.
You could take the recommended motion, the recommendation that's in your packet and change it to say something like, where it says hold a public hearing, you could change that to say another, an additional,
Okay.
if you want an example of a motion that you could make.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we have another public hearing on the code amendments that will be revised in the next packet of the Benton City Municipal Code, Chapter 20.62, Residential Design Standards.
Is there a second?
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Dawn has seconded it.
All in favor?
I.
Aye.
Kearns, aye.
So, the ayes have it.
Okay,
And
Millie,
we've already had the general commissioner comments. And so I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting at 7:56.
Kearns, second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. And go ahead. Thank you for coming. You